Perfect. We'll go ahead and get started. Hello, and welcome to our Foiled Again workshop with the UO Craft Center. And my name is Tiffany Fritz, and I'm the Director of Parent and Family Programs. In just a moment, I will introduce our presenters. During this session, we encourage our participants to engage and create. This is all about letting yourself be creative and having fun. This session is being recorded, so those who were unable to join us can participate, or if you want to, you can go back and watch it as well. And so I know some of us, unfortunately, myself included, forgot my materials at home. So I will definitely be going back and watching this so I can participate and engage in this activity as well. I do want to say for those of us who are joining live that the University of Oregon really values community. And so we want to make sure that we keep this a friendly space. Please refrain from using any inappropriate language or gestures. If by chance you do, we may have to kick you out, but I don't think that will happen at all. So I think that we are good there. And so with that, I would like to introduce David Wagner. He is our Assistant Director of Programming with the Herb Memorial Union Craft Center. And Noelle Flans, who's I wish I was part of the Craft Center sometimes. You all are so wonderful. But the Craft Center's office coordinator.
Thank you, Tiffany. We consider you part of the at this point. I think you're part of our larger group. My name's David. I'm really glad to be here tonight. Thank you for the invitation to host this workshop. Always excited to have an opportunity to meet new people and show off some new skills. So I'm here just to help coordinate. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. I'll be watching the chat while Noelle is demonstrating it, so feel free to type questions there if you have any, and let me know how I can help. And with that, I will turn it over to our creativity and sculpture expert, Noelle Flans.
All right, hello everyone. I'm gonna spotlight myself. Okay, all right, hello everybody. My name is Noelle Flans. I'm a creativity and sculptor expert is quite the title. I would definitely identify as neither of those things, but I appreciate the title of that. That's great. So I am going to show you how to do this really fun project. I thought, what better way than on a Friday evening to entertain you all with a PowerPoint presentation? It's what we all want, right? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick with you. Pull this up. Let's see. All right. Let's try again. Let's see. All right, do y'all see that? I had not, okay. If I maximize it, everybody sees it still? Perfect, cool. All right, so I'm gonna go into just a little bit of an introduction as well. So that way, kind of get to know me a little bit. And please feel free if you wanna use the chat function. I think David's gonna read off if anybody's in there or has questions, but you can also feel free at any point to just shout out questions and unmute yourself as well. So I always like to start off with a little bit of an icebreaker. So in the chat, if you want to put where you're tuning in from, and then in the spirit of tinfoil, right, put in what your favorite dish to bring to a potluck is, just as a little way that you can kind of get to know everybody. While you're doing that, I'm going to introduce myself. So my name is Noelle Flans. My pronouns are she, hers. I have a BFA in printmaking from the Savannah College of Art and Design. And an MFA in studio arts from Washington State University. So I have a long background in art. I've been the office coordinator at the Craft Center since 2018 and been teaching here since 2015, which seems crazy because that feels like a really long time. But I have taught really simple bookbinding classes, embroidery, screen printing, and a workshop that we started throughout COVID called Make Your Mark, which was a class we had kind of envisioned being an in-person class, but has worked out really great as a virtual class because it's really about using materials that you already have at home. So just chat a little bit about that class because that's what has been the inspiration for this project. So Make Your Mark is a creative exploration class. So we look at every workshop, we look at the elements of design and we go a little bit deeper by doing a really simple project with materials that you can often find at home. So that's a great class for beginners. It's a great class for seasoned pros. If you are an artist and art is part of your kind of day-to-day operation, I've always felt like finding really small projects to work on is a great way to really access that part of your brain and keep it engaged and without pouring materials and time into something that you're trying to perfect or maybe you're trying to even sell. So we do a lot of problem solving. We talk about your inner critic. Mine has a lot to say. I definitely was doing a little bit of jumping jacks before class because I was trying to get the nerves out. And then we also talk about how to continue some projects that you're working on or emotionally let go of the projects that maybe you've abandoned and decide to just let it go and start working on new projects or tackle new things. And so I often refer to this class as the don't get too attached class. We often do projects where we make something in a very limited amount of time, and then we destroy them, and then we rebuild them, and then we destroy them again, and then we rebuild them again. So I would include that in this workshop as well as don't get too attached to your sculpture. Kind of come in with an open mind. All right, so what are we doing today and why am I using tinfoil? So I've listed a whole bunch of supplies. If you have them around your house, feel free to grab them. If you don't have anything, certainly you can, like Tiffany was saying, you can come back and watch this video later. So we're going to talk about what form is. I'm going to throw some vocabulary at you. There's no quiz, so don't panic. But just so that we're all on the same page and we all kind of are using similar language, we can go over some very simple vocabulary. We're going to do a little bit of brainstorming. So if you have a blank sheet of paper or scrap piece of paper, pen or pencil, that's great. Then we're going to do the project. I'll demo a little bit. Truth be told, crinkling up tissue paper is actually pretty simple. So I won't need to get into the very minute techniques of it, but it should be pretty easy to follow along. And then we're going to do a quick check-in about what you've made. I love doing a project debrief at the end of every workshop. That way you can kind of see what you've done and look back on it and talk about that experience a little bit. All right, so some vocab. So the biggest word we're going to use today is form. There's a great picture there. If you're more of a visual learner, I definitely am. So when we talk about form, we're talking about 3D objects, right? So I've got like my little roll for tinfoil here, my roll of tape here. So 3D objects. And just to make it super confusing, form can also be used in 2D design as well, but it's all about the artist kind of creating that illusion. But form is really anything that's got some dimension to it. So cones, pyramids, spheres, cubes, those are all forms. So I'm going to keep saying form a lot in this workshop. And then shape. So shape is kind of the 2D version of form. So you can think about very geometric shapes, right? Like your circle, you've got your square, you've got your triangle. And then there's also very organic forms as well. So things that kind of have some curvature to them, maybe a little bit more abstract. Shape is great. It can represent so many different things, especially abstract forms. And then lastly, abstract versus realism. So I'm not a realism kind of gal. If somebody asked me to draw a chair, good luck to you, because it's not going to be me. So I've always loved working more in the abstract. And so abstract art, doesn't attempt to represent an accurate depiction of reality, which I love. So if you are more of an abstract artist, or if you have a background in sculpture and maybe you don't want to spend the time tonight making something that's really realistic, come do abstract with me. I think that's the way to do it. Okay. So as we start going into this project, and I'm going to show you some examples as well, so you can kind of get an idea of where we're going. you want to start thinking in the round. And so, like I said at the start, my background is in printmaking. So I'm all about flat. I love working in the 2D. So working in the round is actually really hard for me. So when I start looking at something, so I've got my first little rolled up ball of tinfoil. When we think about working in the round, especially with an object that we're holding in our hand, you want to really think about the round. Spin it around, look at all the different angles of it, tip it upside down, and really see it. And then consider how forms can elicit different feelings. So we'll have a little brainstorming session in a second to go over, what kinds of feelings, when we list them off, what kind of forms do you start thinking of? And then we're going to use tinfoil and tissue paper to create some of those forms. So that's where we're going. And this was all inspired by this artist. This is Don Seaton, who is also an art therapist. He was a pioneer of art therapy. We don't have time tonight, but I highly, highly recommend to YouTube. You can just type in Don and his birds. It's like an 8-minute student video. It's incredible. It's such a great video. You also see his amazing house. But so this photo of him with the rhinoceros, that is a tinfoil sculpture that is made out of tinfoil and then wrapped with tape. That's always what he's been about. He's a tinfoil sculptor. And then these smaller projects is what he started doing as he got older. There are these tinfoil birds. And so he creates these shapes and these forms out of tinfoil, wraps them in masking tape, and then paints them, and then leaves them in parks all over. I think he was in Minnesota. I can't remember what city, but leaves them all over his town and just kind of watches people interact with them. And sometimes he'll watch bird watchers. They'll see it and they're like, what bird is that? And then they'll get closer and then they realize like, it's not a real bird. Or he'll watch people take the sculptures, put them in their pocket and take them home, or relocate them too. So I've always thought that was really inspirational. He's a fascinating human being if you want to do a little bit of research on him. And so the first time I did this project, I'm going to show you an example of it. I wanted to, originally my idea was I'm going to make a succulent. That's my form. I'm going to make like a little succulent. And as I started working through this project, I had a little bag of sequins and little gemstones and like weird stuff like that. I like to call it flair. And I had all this stuff and I was like, I cannot figure out how to make a succulent. Tried to make like a little cactus. That wasn't really working out. And so I'm looking at these gemstones and I'm looking at these sequins and how they're kind of interacting with some of the natural light in my house. And I was like, I want to do something that feels interactive. I want to do something that involves light, something that's a little bit more expressive. And so I made a flashlight. This was my very abstract version of a flashlight with a little disco ball sculpture. And so I used these feathers and I created this little coil to try to create the idea of something kind of coming out of this flashlight and then having some of the light in my house bounce around. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, boy, does this look like a quarantine project. You are 1000% correct. That was absolutely like deep into quarantine. So again, as you're thinking about some of these projects, some of these forms, lower the bar for yourself a little bit. Allow, you might write down a form thinking like, I'm going to make a cactus, and you might end up with a flashlight, and that's perfect. You're winning the game. All right, so let's start brainstorming. And I'm going to grab a pen and a piece of paper. So we want to start considering how forms make you feel. So remember that some forms, they might remind you of something maybe that's comforting, sometimes something that's not comforting. It can remind you of specific events. Like I said earlier, a lot of forms can be very abstract. So you can think of how a shape can become a form, like an organic shape. And they can really represent your emotions and then tell us about your identities. So the Make Your Mark class that we have is a lot about storytelling. It's a lot about talking about who you are and where your creative self has come from. So forms can do all of that. So we're going to write down some responses to these scenarios to try to get a sense of form. So for this first one, if you want to do it with me, just on a piece of paper, we want to write down a form that feels nostalgic. This is kind of like word association. Like what's the first form that pops into your head when you hear the word nostalgic? And you can write it down. You can share it in the chat if you want. We'll just spend a couple minutes doing this. And then we want a form that feels energetic. A form that feels grounded. Form that feels empty. A form that feels smooth. Oh, I like those nostalgic ones, a teacup, lace tablecloth, that's great. A form that feels cool. And then a form that feels troubled. That's always my favorite one. Give yourself a couple more. Christmas tree ornament, I like that. And I'll share, I loved in one of the workshops where we did this, somebody realized that all of their answers, even though they technically were objects, were mostly flat. So she wrote like tea bag, an envelope, and she realized that all of these things were very flat. But she still was able to make a form that was like a tea bag. So if you end up doing something similar where you're like, actually, all these forms were basically two-dimensional, you can get there. Albums, records, that's a great one. This is the first time I've done this where in reading the word grounded, I went to an anchor. I thought that was interesting. Spend just a couple more seconds on this. Energetic, a runner, I like that.
Having a terrible time coming up with empty. It's a really interesting one to work with. I'm curious
It is.
what other people are coming up with for that. Ooh,
Yeah, I like base, that's good. So it's so funny, I put ocean wave for nostalgic. So that's really funny. I love when there's a little bit of crossover. Boiling water in a pot, I like that. Up for grounded, nice. For empty this time, I keep thinking of a carton, like an empty, probably because in my fridge at home, there's like 2 empty cartons of milk. It's just like that tiny little bit left in it. Are you thinking of the grocery store after this? All right, so then, and these will be on the next page as well. So if you're not quite finished, there's still plenty of time. Empty school classroom, very true. Troubled cat, yes. All right, so now we're gonna take your list and then just very, very briefly, just really briefly, we're gonna do a little bit of sketching. So you can choose one of these forms, maybe the form that you feel like you can kind of represent in a small sculpture. You can do a few of them. So, you know, at first I was like, I like the idea of a wave. I feel like that can be such an interesting shape. You know, you're kind of selecting just one area to maybe focus on. So maybe it's some of the drama. Our lights just turned off in the painting studio on their own. Just gonna turn them back on. There we go. That will probably happen a few more times. So when we think of like a wave, right, like there's some drama to that. So you can think of that in your sculpture as well. Like maybe there's an action that's happening. I wrote down for one of mine for energetic, I put the word lemon. And I think that's the one I want to focus on the most. So just really quickly on your scrap piece of paper, just do a little bit of sketching. And this is great just as a little bit of a reminder too, of different elements of that form. So like for a lemon, maybe that means that it's a lemon that's cut in half. And maybe I'll be able to see those seeds that are kind of in the middle. There's usually some dots on lemons. And so as you're sketching, I'm going to start going through onto our next slide and talk to you a little bit more about the project. So if at any point, so I'm going to be crinkling a lot of tinfoil. So if at any point it becomes a little too loud, if you just let us know in the chat. And then David's got his best dad jokes just lined up ready to keep you entertained while I make a little tinfoil sculpture. You can also feel free to mute me as well. I'll probably just be rambling in the background too. So this is a really simple project to do. And again, the reason why I like it is because tinfoil, it's a material that most of us can have pretty easy access to. And also I like to involve tissue paper in this project as well. I think that nice textural difference between tissue paper and tinfoil is great. Tinfoil can really hold its shape. It's so great to construct an object with, but you can also think of a couple different things too. So maybe your shape or maybe your form is hollow. And so maybe it's got that empty space in the center. So you can start thinking about what it means to create kind of that outer shell of your sculpture. Start to think about those different elements. So if you are doing something like a wave, we'll keep using that example, is your form just that wave that's crashing down, or are there other things kind of around it? Is there a boat that's sort of interacting with that wave? So you can kind of think like, do you need to make multiple forms in order to actually make your form? So just a couple things to consider. So I'm going to start, and I think I'm going to do my lemon. It might end up being a lime because I think I only have green tissue paper. So just start playing and crunching up your tinfoil if you're following along. So I'm going to start. I think it would be fun to have a lemon that's just that outer shell, but I think I'm going to do one that's a full lemon. And so you can think about size as well. So, you might decide that you want to work very miniature. That's great. It doesn't have to be the life size of something. So I think I want my lemon to probably just be able to fit in my hand. And you'll start to find too, as you start kind of pressing this in, you can really, really push down. You can use the surface of the table to really push down and try to get some of those smoothed edges. After we're done creating our tinfoil sculpture, we're going to wrap it in masking tape, and that's really great to try to smooth out some edges as well. Yes, changing the scale of something in painting and drawing, sculpting can help your creativity. It's very true. I've always loved 2D design projects and 3D design projects where you have to take something that's really small and blow it up, or do the vice versa. And so when you've got to the point where you've got maybe the base of your little sculpture, you can start doing things. So the tinfoil that I'm using is the type that you use in hair salons. It's a little bit thinner of a tinfoil. Using something that's like, I've also got this very intense, durable, heavy duty tinfoil. That's a little bit thicker. It's a little bit harder to try to smooth out edges and to form maybe smaller details. But so also consider if you've got a pair of scissors, you can cut your tinfoil down a little bit. And you can also use your tape or your glue to try to piece some of those pieces together. I'm going to tear off a couple smaller pieces. Start just pushing them together. And you can keep wrapping and adding layers to it. Sometimes I find if I'm trying to attach smaller pieces to the bigger one, if you take a really small piece of tinfoil, kind of put one on top of the other and then wrap it in that tinfoil again, it helps really join them together. I'm now realizing that my lemon, I guess until I add color, is really going to look like a potato. So I'm open to that as well. You can also, which I did not bring with me, you can use a hammer on your tinfoil sculpture and really hit it, and that can also help kind of move some of those little bumps around. So I feel like I've got a little bit of a lemon shape. I was trying to get that little bit of a smaller curve at the top. But I feel pretty good with that. I like the size of that. All right, so our next step is going to be to wrap it in masking tape. Oh, and I love a good icebreaker chat kind of question. So this is a question that we often ask in the Make Your Mark class, which is, so I always encourage people, if you have a project that you've had to abandon in the last year, especially, what was that project and why did you abandon it? And so in that class, I encourage folks to bring their projects with them. We can talk about them, we can critique them if they're feeling brave and they want to have a critique. And so if you have any projects that you are that you've had to abandon in the past year, please let us know. Paper bag to represent empty. I like that. My project that I abandoned this year, I was sharing with David yesterday. I had to abandon, I thought I was going to I had big dreams of painting. I was like, this is my year. I'm going to paint. I'm going to be a great painter. And I got a bunch of wood panels. I got some gouache. I got some tutorials lined up, and I succeeded at one, and now they're all still sitting in exactly where they started. So that was my big abandonment of the year. But feel free if you want to drop any in the chat. And so with the masking tape, I'm just taking, about 12-inch pieces and wrapping them around. And you can cut them a little bit smaller, especially if your form has a lot of different edges to it, especially. And so you can kind of start to see how it's smoothing out a lot more. And you can use the tape too to try to build up a little bit more, kind of like what the tinfoil is doing, to take up some more room and do some details too. I also like that idea of doing that empty grocery bag or to do the empty one and bringing that actually to a grocery store, like a life-size version. A fun practical joke. Let's see, really wanted to learn how to crochet or knit. Hopefully abandoned it, but definitely on hold. Yeah. We had a student who right before the first shutdown happened, took a thing of yarn with her. She was like, I'm gonna learn how to knit for a couple weeks at that point. And she recently brought the yarn back to us. And I think she did a little bit, but she didn't, apparently was not the craft for her.
I started one of our craft kits that we distribute. In my gazillion years here at the Craft Center, have never learned any embroidery. Noelle, being an expert at that, has put out a few great craft kits along those lines, and I finally learned some embroidery, and my little embroidered mammoth is about halfway done, and
Nice.
and travels with me everywhere in my bag, just in case I need a project.
I like it. Yeah, embroidery is a nice one. It always welcomes you back. All right, how are we doing on time? We're doing okay. Okay, great.
We are good. I guess I could have just spoken up instead of put that in the chat and had you read that. My apologies.
Oh, no, you're good. All right. So I've got my little masking taped lemon potato. Call it both of them. Maybe a lime. We'll see. So next, I'm going to. So you have a couple options here. So you know, in a lot of times when you see this project, the next stage is to do a nice layer of white paint on it, get it kind of, you know, prepped and ready to be painted. The masking tape is also helpful with that. It'll help kind of take that paint on a little bit more. When we teach this class in the Make Your Mark class, not everybody has paint available. So the masking tape is also great if you have markers or crayons, you can color on it. But for the sake of time in that class, I encourage folks to use tissue paper and a little bit of glue and just glue on it and start adding tissue paper to it. I also find that using tissue paper is really fun because it's a little bit transparent, so you can add a lot of layers to it. So I think I had one of our student workers make confetti recently, and I think she used all of the yellow for a yellow and green confetti, but she did leave some gold. So I think I'm going to do a nice little gold lemon. So I'm just going to tear some pieces. And kind of like with the tape, I feel like if you tear down a little bit smaller, that's helpful. It's a little bit easier to work with. And then I've got just a cruddy paintbrush here, and then a little tray of Elmer's glue. And especially with tissue paper, I highly, highly recommend don't try to put the glue onto the tissue paper because it just goes everywhere. Bless the people who brought a glue stick to this workshop. I'm very sorry. Glue sticks, you'll figure it out. I have absolute confidence that you'll get there, but it is a little bit harder. So I'm going to go ahead and take my glue and I'm going to put that right directly onto my bit of masking tape. And then just almost like a collage, just starting to put my tissue paper on there.
Well, when you get a chance, hold that up close to the camera so we can see a little detail on how that's looking. That's awesome. It's just, I'm so impressed with this because it's gold tissue paper. It's literally just like gold leaf.
Yeah.
Gold leafing, you add a little adhesive, you add little scraps, you make sure to press it all down, and it turns into this beautiful shiny golden object. So
yeah.
I'm fully expecting from this lemon.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like too, I know that we're a little bit past Easter, but if you're still craving to make any sort of egg art, this is a great way to do it too, without actually using eggs. Just putting that on there. And this can get, you know, as messy as you want it to be. I feel like doing that layering with the tissue paper is really great. Painting is fun. I recommend if you are painting and maybe you've got a lot of different colors that you want to use, a hair dryer is your friend. Leave it to dry for a little bit of time in between, just so that the paint doesn't run everywhere. The first time I did this, I did not take that advice and just wanted to continue painting my beautiful flashlight, and it got everywhere. And then too, you know, if you have, so I really do have a little paper bag here that says Flair on it. I like to keep these bags just kind of hidden all throughout the craft center. The Flair has feathers, it's got pipe cleaners, it's got googly eyes, it's got pom-poms. It's kind of like all the, like you hit up the craft aisle at Michael's, got a ton of crafts. You can incorporate some of that stuff too. So I know that there's some little adhesive gems hanging out in there. So I might try to use some of that. There's no shame in bedazzling your form as well. And thinking too about, you know, we can't touch on all of the elements of art in this, but it is this is a great project for, to work with kids as well. Yeah, this is a great project too if you're trying to learn a little bit more about sculpture, and maybe you have big dreams of making like a really big sculpture. This is using tinfoil is great to start to make just a little maquette of your sculpture. So before you really commit to having all those pieces, you can start to just make a smaller version of it. Let's see, what else do we have here?
I was also thinking that when you're working with inexpensive materials like this, it's a great opportunity to put things out in the world, to make it a little less precious to yourself and make it more about, you know, like leaving the birds and trees, you know, that kind of idea is so great. And it's one of my, it's my personal artistic drive in many ways, is to, you know, put things out and have people interact with them. So I love the idea of making little foil sculptures and distributing them or giving them away or sending them out somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think of like the yarn bombing that was, I feel like there's actually one right out in front of the EMU still. It's on a bike rack where somebody knitted or crocheted like onto the bike rack. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the idea too that you're, you know, even if somebody doesn't take the sculpture with them, they're still kind of taking that experience of discovery. And, you know, so much of art making, especially if you do it often or you do it professionally, if you're doing it for money, you can get really stuck in your own head because these items become so precious that to just kind of make something a little silly, something to share with the world is so great. It's its own kind of precious moment on itself.
I don't know if all of you have been to the U of O campus, but we have a fairly large scale blue heron sculpture right at the kind of the entrance to campus, done by a local artist out of scrap materials. And it's this big, beautiful sculpture. And one winter when it got really, really cold, we had an ice storm. Somebody knit some booties directly onto the heron sculpture, and they stayed there for a long time. It was great.
I love that. I love those like a little bit of guerrilla kind of art practices. The nice thing too, if you're using any type of like a Mod Podge or Elmer's glue, it'll dry clear. So if you're like me and you have a hard time staying in the lines, it'll dry clear. So now I keep thinking, I'm like, you know, I really, I've been talking about doing a lemon over the last couple days. That was a little bit of a setup. I knew that lemon could fit into that energetic little category. But now I'm looking at this and I'm like, this does kind of feel more like a potato. But also now I'm thinking of like the Mr. Potato, Mrs. Potato. And I know I have googly eyes in here, and I know that I could make this into a little potato head. So I'm gonna see what I can do. I've got it. My nice little gold something. So I'm gonna look in my bag of flair.
I absolutely love your creativity. I find sometimes that I get stuck on what I had originally thought of or what I wanted it to look like, and I can't see past that. And your flow of creative thought as an approach to this is I'm very envious of it.
Well, thank you. I had left this part out. I had originally had it in my kind of intro. I loved being in art school. It was a great experience, but I had such a hard time picking a major. I kind of landed in printmaking because my advisor was like, you have most of these credits, you just need to graduate and move on to the world. But it was because I wasn't really good at one thing. I was kind of okay at a lot of different things, enough to hold my own. And so I feel like if that sounds familiar, that sounds like you, trying to find that kind of creative flow feels a little bit even more like second nature, because you just start to, you realize like, I might not be able to perfect this one thing, which is totally fine.
I would say another great way to open up your creativity is to do a project like this with somebody else, where you're bouncing ideas back and forth, or especially if you're teaching or showing somebody how to do something, it can really open that door to, oh, well, you could do it this way, or, oh, what if it's just entirely different? What if it's not a lemon and it's a potato? And now I really want to know what golden French fries look like.
Yes.
I'm so like ready for branching off of that idea. I think it would be great.
Totally. Yeah. The when I did my flashlight, like I mentioned, it was kind of like deep in quarantine, and my partner was there, and he kind of knew what I was trying to work on. Like he kind of watched this develop, and then but he left the room, and I was making a succulent, and he came back and he's like, "What is this coil coming out of this weird empty layer?" And but he was so instrumental, and also kind of giving some ideas too about like, well, you have all these feathers. What if you put feathers or pipe cleaners or all this other stuff and kind of make it come out a little bit? Speaking of pipe cleaners, let's see. And I also think too, this is looking sillier and sillier. I also like the idea too that you can give character to some of these forms. So if you're somebody who really enjoys, storytelling and giving your form kind of some life to it, I think that's great too. And providing it a little bit more of a personality. And I say that because mine now has eyes, and I've got a little pipe cleaner boa happening here. Maybe that's going to become some arms. This is also a great project too. I have a friend who is an elementary school teacher, and when she starts teaching about adjectives and nouns and everything, she has the kids write some adjectives on pieces of paper, put them in a hat, and then they have to choose a couple. And then they do a very similar project like this, but they have to use those adjectives in the form. So that's also very fun too. I like projects that have these really weird parameters that you have to start following, because if you're given all the rules and you have to follow this set of rules, it's such a fun way to be able to really try to tap into some of that creativity and push it a little bit more. All right. Yes, I will turn off my spotlight.
Oh, you don't have to do that now. I was just thinking maybe at the end we could do a show, or we can now. I'm fine either way. I know that sometimes when we're recording, it's, harder. Will you hold yours up though? I want to see it again closer.
Yes. All right, I'm gonna hold that up. So there's my golden potato, my golden Mr. Mrs. Potato. So I found
That's amazing.
So I've got some buttons, I've got some googly eyes. I tried to make it very, very silly. I feel like because of the glue, I started noticing that glue really dulled the gold tissue paper. So it really did start looking more like a potato. And I've got other stuff in here too, like stuff that you could probably make, like, I don't know, like a little top hat or something with. I also find, so in my art practice, I use text a lot. And so one of the things that I love to use in projects like these are like these little letter beads that you use probably to make like friendship bracelets and stuff. Those are fun to use to try to tie in. So if you're somebody who likes to express themselves with text, that's great too. And so let's do some show and tell if anybody wants to show up theirs. I also have on the screen now a little bit of a debrief, so you can start kind of thinking about this experience. So I went a little silly with it. It's Friday evening. It's been a long week, feeling a little silly. But some of you might have decided to not go that route, and that's great. So here are some questions that you can kind of start thinking about, especially as we do some show and tell, just some stuff to consider. I kind of mentioned before that feeling of crushing tinfoil versus crushing tin paper or tissue paper. What did it feel like? Like, what does crunching up tinfoil feel like? For me, you know, I'm washing my hands constantly here. I've got hand sanitizer all the time. It kind of hurt. Like, it kind of, that rough texture, like it felt really, really rough. Whereas the tissue paper that I'm working with, it's kind of got that little bit of a gold sheen to it. So it felt really smooth. So you can kind of think about, what did that tinfoil feel like? Was there a form that you couldn't figure out how to construct? That's me in a nutshell. I always pick the form that I'm like, I got this, I know how to do this. And then I start making it and I'm like, I have no idea. What does a lemon actually even look like? I also had written down on my my list of brainstorming, I wrote for cool Ray-Bans, the coolest. But I knew as soon as I started sketching, I was like, there's not enough time. There's not enough time in the day for me to try to get through and do a whole pair of Ray-Bans. So was there a form that you tried to do and you couldn't fully construct? Again, what did that tissue paper feel like compared to the tinfoil? What form did you relate to the most? So if you got to make multiples, or you're thinking about making multiples, you can think about how those multiples look next to each other. How did they interact with each other? And then what form, if you were able to make multiples or you started making one, what did you relate to the most? You know, I keep saying, I loved the concept of the lemon because there seemed like so many different variations on how to do that. But then as I got into the process, it kind of had to morph into something else. And so I feel like I relate to that so much, of starting a project and having to have it kind of snowball a little bit. And then if you made multiple forms, did you put them together, or are you going to keep them separate, and why? I feel like that's it's an interesting thing, especially if those multiples were supposed to have an interaction together. How are they now separated? Why did you decide to separate them? So just some kind of questions to sort of think over. I'm gonna turn off my spotlight. And so if anybody wants to share theirs, or ideas that they had, or anything that surprised them, stuff that they learned. I love a good show and tell. You can also put it in the chat too.
I will chime in and just say thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. As we were going through this, I just kept thinking, in addition to a creative outlet, like, what a great meditation technique. Just something that's really tactile, something that's low stakes. I know you mentioned an interest in painting. Like, that feels like a commitment, right? Like, you purchase material for that and you like prepare for something. And I love how wonderfully low stakes, but still how creative and tactile this can be.
For sure. And I would say I contribute that so much to the craft center, like craft center energy. When we do one of the things that we've always done for students is doing a freebie Friday. And so students are invited to go out into the EMU, they get this interaction with our staff, and they do kind of these very low stakes projects. And sometimes they do become high stakes projects. Like we've had students who get so into doing knitting, and every term they know we're going to do knitting out in the EMU, and they just keep bringing back the project, and they spend, you know, that 2 hours trying to really perfect something. But for the most part, it's these very low stakes projects that are all about your interaction with the process, with the materials, to try to do that kind of meditation process. That's great. Not crafty, but had fun. That's great. I love it. And made a butterfly. That's amazing.
Well, nobody has to leave just yet. I am going to take this opportunity to just thank the Craft Center again. Noelle, this was wonderful. I greatly appreciate you taking time out of your Friday evening to hang out with me and family members. Thanks for letting us record it. If you are joining us via recording, please don't hesitate to reach out to my duck is myduckis@uoregon.edu. If you have questions about the Craft Center, if I can't answer them, like David said, I pretend to be a pseudo member, so I'm happy to forward questions along so they get answered. But just thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you've enjoyed Spring Family Weekend.